I'd like to introduce Adrian Moore, who's Vice President of Policy for the Reason Foundation.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming. So yes, I'm Vice President at the Reason Foundation. Those of you not familiar with the Reason Foundation, it's a nonprofit organization, 40 years old. We have offices in LA and Washington, D.C. We publish Reason Magazine, the magazine of free minds and free markets. And my division, the policy division, focuses on working with state, local, and sometimes federal government officials on implementing policy changes. We specialize in a lot of different research areas: environmental policy, transportation policy, government finance, education reform, and so forth. In transportation, I myself am a transportation economist, though I've worked in lots of other areas since I've been at Reason. And transportation is a particular passion. We've worked on transportation since 1970, and we've specialized in the development of different forms of road pricing, innovations in delivering transportation infrastructure of various types around the world. And 5 years ago, this fellow named Bob Galvin called me out of the blue and said, can I meet with you? I want to talk about transportation. And so I'm Googling Bob Galvin, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. He's the former CEO of Motorola. And he's here in Chicago. So I came out, we met, and he just said, I want to talk about transportation. So it was really sort of, but he's Bob Galvin, so certainly I'm willing to have the conversation. And we sit down and he starts telling me about his perspective as head of Motorola, building factories all over the world, all over the United States, trying to run a large company, and saying, what I've come to realize is that congestion is going to gut our economy, that our production of our economy of goods and services takes place primarily in our metropolitan areas, and our metropolitan areas are being strangled by congestion. It's like hardening of the arteries. It's like too much cholesterol. Just eventually it's going to clog things up until they stop working. And I can already see these costs are far beyond what any of our conventional, rather poor measures of the economic costs of congestion. And he proceeded to list all these different ways in which congestion is affecting the economy that is not captured in any of the measures that transportation economists use. And he said, we can't have this. It's got to be solved. Can we work together to come up with solutions to major metropolitan area congestion? And so we started working together. Those of you who picked up a copy of the book Mobility First out there, if you want to pick one, if you didn't get one and you want one on the way out, please grab one. That's sort of Sam, who you're going to hear from in a few minutes, and I wrote that, and it sort of encompasses everything we came up with working with Bob over the years on addressing the problem of congestion. And one of the things we decided to do to make it a little more tangible was go to a bunch of different cities around the nation and go through the modeling process, the planning process, and look at what could be done in different cities to actually reduce congestion. Because, as you're probably familiar, the current long-range transportation plan in all American metropolitan areas, including Chicago, is to spend many billions of dollars over the next 25 years and for congestion to get worse. I think if the school system came and said, you know what, our 25-year plan is to spend billions of dollars educating children in the next 25 years, and test scores are going to go down. Sorry, that's just the way it is. So we're going to spend billions of dollars and congestion is going to be stable, and I don't think anybody thinks congestion is good in Chicago right now. So as in all the other metropolitan areas, what we're trying to do is figure out, are there ways unconstrained? The planning process is constrained by a lot of federal rules. In some ways it's trying to marry federal money, state money, constraints, bring all of the different parties together. You wind up with a lot of ladles in the pot besides solving congestion. And so our plan focuses much more specifically on addressing congestion, which is a key measure of the success of the transportation system for a lot of users. And our approach to that is I'm oversimplifying here, but to try to identify projects that would produce a lot of mobility benefits relative to the costs and allow people to move within the region 25 years from now more freely than they otherwise would be able to do. And ideally to have that system be largely self-funded rather than having to be funded out of the current transportation funds, which anybody who follows transportation knows aren't really adequate for doing what the current goals are. So we have a problem with inadequate resources for transportation. We didn't want to add to that problem with this project. So going back to Bob Galvin's vision, how do we practically and concretely develop ideas that, if implemented, would reduce congestion in the region and provide people with more choices that they actually want to take advantage of, rather than trying to change their behavior, trying to convince people to do things differently from what they want to do, but instead build a system that would serve what they want to do. So that's culminated here in the Chicago plan. We've done plans in Atlanta, Miami, Lee County, Florida. We have plans coming out over the next couple of years in Denver, Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Northern Virginia / DC. So among all of those, I think we're going to see how these ideas actually play out in a lot of different metropolitan area settings. So to talk a little bit more detail about what we're proposing here in Chicago, I want to introduce Sam Staley. He's the lead author of the report. My colleague, he's the director at the DeVoe Moore Center at Florida State University. He divides his time between there and Dayton, Ohio. He's a senior fellow at Reason Foundation, has worked with Reason for many, many years on land use, planning issues, as well as transportation planning and implementation. And he's had quite the journey working with our partners on developing this plan for Chicago that he's now going to explain to you. Thanks, Sam.
Thank you, Adrian, and thank you to the Union League Club of Chicago for allowing us for hosting this forum, and also should emphasize it is going to be a forum. So what my plan to do here is really spend the next 15 or 20 minutes talking a little bit more about the plan, the perspective, provide a little bit of an overview in terms of how we went about developing the plan and what some of the results were. But immediately following me, there will be comments from Peter Scosi, who's Vice President of the Metropolitan Planning Council, and Richard Porter, who is a Vice President at the Federal Reserve Board of Chicago. And we're hoping John Gates will be able to make it as well, who's Chairman of the RTA. So, and I think that's actually the way we've structured this forum is actually important for understanding the way we sort of look at this study. And that we recognize that what we're going to propose, while we believe it's actually quite bold for what's been proposed in the past, we believe it's important for creating a discussion and being part of the public debate about infrastructure and transportation in the Chicago area. And we think we're putting some things on the table that are different and also hopefully are complementary to some things that are already happening in Chicago, but we think we're taking it to the next level. But the purpose of the forum is to actually add to that conversation and to that debate. And I think you'll find certainly with Peter's comments and others that there are different perspectives that are going to be brought into this. And the question we will have is, and what we're going to be trying to propose is, how does what we're talking about fit into the broader scheme of what we're trying to accomplish in Chicago? And again, to reiterate what Adrian mentioned, what we're really trying to do is thinking about a way to tame congestion, because we believe that congestion, and particularly if it's rising congestion, if we're talking about growth over a period of 20 or 30 years or longer, this is something that is economically debilitating. And so the question is, what can we do about it? Now, part of what we were trying to do at Reason Foundation is also ask ourselves, where is our value added? Where can we contribute to the debate? In other words, given our expertise, our background, what we have been investing in for over 30 years, what perspective can we bring into this that others might? And to be honest, we've been in the forefront of road pricing, P3s, and other regional approaches to transportation. So it also made sense for us to make this a cornerstone of our approach to looking at congestion in Chicago. So let me just move quickly through some background a little bit, give you to help frame this, and then move into some of the, and also provide a little bit of background on the way we did the modeling, how we did it, and then talk about the results. First of all, as many people in this room are probably familiar with, congestion is already in the billions of dollars in terms of the cost imposed on the Chicago economy, and is expected to increase, at least based on the forecast that we've been examining, as well as studies done not just by Reason Foundation but others as well. And so, on some metrics, congestion in Chicago on certain parts of the system are as severe as even in Los Angeles. And we've detailed some of this. All these data that we're providing in this forum are actually detailed in the longer study. So that's something to, which is available on the web as well. One of the things that we found interesting, though, is when we were looking at the way traffic is distributed within the region, is that the expressways are actually an important source of a lot of these congestion in the Chicago, particularly in the Chicago area. And one of the things that struck out, or struck me, for example, was that while expressways account for 19% of the lane miles, they actually account for 36% of the travel delay. And so we really thought early on in the study, and we've been coming to Chicago for, 2007, I think, is 2006. We decided early on, if we were going to really look for a place where we could make an impact, the expressways, and trying to think about that, the network impacts and how that relates to the region, is going to be a crucial part of that. Another aspect of this, which we believe, is that new capacity has to be part of the solution. We recognize it's not going to be the entire solution, but it needs to be an important part of the solution. And we believe, based on not only our studies of Chicago and elsewhere, and as an urban economist looking at transportation over decades, that new capacity is really a necessary part of any plan moving forward. So the question becomes, what kind of capacity is that? How much is it? And how do you actually finance it? Those become important. I honestly believe that you're not going to be able to address congestion or make serious inroads into it unless you're looking at serious expansions in capacity, particularly if you're growing, meaning you're adding people, you're adding jobs. All of that requires a major investment in new infrastructure. And we do believe that in Chicago, and we talk about this in more detail in the study, I can't get into it here, there's certainly a lot that can be done to improve the efficiency of the existing system. But we also believe that a crucial part of this is going to be adding to the existing system with new capacity. What our primary focus were, one, again, as Adrian mentioned some of this, so I'll be very brief about it. We're looking for absolute reductions in travel time. In other words, we're actually reducing congestion so people can get from point A to point B faster. We're looking at regional capacity improvements, and we were very intent on identifying specific projects. In other words, we didn't want this to be abstract, adding X number of lane miles, for example. We wanted to actually get down to the nitty-gritty, what kinds of projects and what parts of the region seem to make sense. We are also really focused on financing, because proposing a project without a way to pay for it really is not going to do much good for many people. So the other question for us, and Reason, again, has been in the forefront of road pricing for decades at this point, we were really focused on whether user fees could actually underwrite the cost of this. And when we started out, we weren't sure if it was going to be 100% or 50%. The bottom line is we had to analyze these projects in the context of Chicago's actual transportation needs and projected economic growth before we could figure that out. And we also, as I mentioned, we do talk about improving the operations of the system, and we also looked at regional transit investments. And I'll talk about that in a little bit, but we may actually, but that's also something that we didn't ignore during this process. So what did we do? Well, first of all, what we did is we built on, let me back up a little bit. When Reason Foundation goes into looking at the transportation plans for individual metropolitan areas, we are really opposed to starting from scratch and sort of building something new. We try to identify in those regions any transportation models that already exist and work within the system. And part of what we did in those early stages of research was really trying to understand and get a sense of what transportation models were being used and seemed to have a validity for the region. And we found very early on that the Metropolis 2020 model which was developed by Smart Mobility, was actually a very important starting point for us. And so we developed that. We developed a relationship with Smart Mobility as our consultants. We liked their model because it considered land use impacts. It also considered things like transit ridership and mode shifts. That when we were looking at this in the early stages, a lot of transportation models really didn't factor those issues in, but we knew that was crucial, particularly in a region like Chicago, where transit does play a very important role, particularly in commuter travel. And also, what was important for us is Smart Mobility's model looked at time of day pricing. In other words, it wasn't looking at a flat price, not looking at a toll that's one rate. They actually had in their capacity to think about what happens if you change the rate over a period of time. And then what we did is we added on to that model. We actually underwrote the expansion and adding more layers and complexity to it. We actually expanded the road pricing periods to include 7. So not only do we include peak periods, we also include shoulder periods. What are those hours out just next to the peaks that also are heavily traveled, and to what extent can we use pricing? We also built into the model dynamic pricing. In other words, what we're really interested in doing is ensuring that someone can get from any point in Chicago using some facility, the ability to do that in free flow travel speeds. Not necessarily the entire system, but the capacity we were adding. What we were trying to do is say, if we're going to build this capacity, and what we want to do is price it so that you are guaranteed 65 miles per hour if you're on that road facility. So this is a very different way of thinking about how you price roads and how you think about identifying priorities. And we were able to do that with the Smart Mobility model that was a little different in trying to think about how you actually do that. That's why we use experts and consultants to figure out how to make that work. We also added income effects. The question is, if we're going to grow, then your income's going to grow. Your choices about transportation and travel mode will change. That is factored into the model as well. And then we made sure that everything we were proposing would be priced. There's nothing, so any user is going to be paying a price to use that facility based on the time of day and the level of congestion. So those were the enhancements that we were adding. And this is a quick summary of the projects that we identified as being what we thought were crucial after consulting with a lot of people. I'm not going to go through individually, because sometimes what we would do is we would, when we were first meeting with the experts and the people that have worked in the area, we wanted to make sure that any controversial project were ones that we vetted, and we didn't want to actually expose experts to concerns in the public, especially if they're not used to being in the public eye. So we would essentially created a menu of potential projects, and then we examined those projects to determine whether or not we thought that would improve the mobility on a regional level as well as in particular segments. And at the end of the day, after looking at that menu and examining the different effects, we ended up with these projects. There are actually a total of 11, but these are the main road pricing ones. Includes what is the Crosstown Tunnel, which has actually been an idea for a long time in the city of Chicago. This is actually paralleling Cicero Avenue. An extension to Midway Airport to provide better access to Midway Airport. Also, we looked at tunnels, parallel tunnels under Kennedy and Eisenhower. You might ask, why tunnels? Well, in a built-up urban environment, actually expanding horizontally is not only very expensive, but it creates a lot of social, cultural, and economic barriers, let alone political barriers. And what we found in looking at infrastructure improvements around the world is that more and more cities are going under. They're looking below, creating tunnels in order to solve their congestion problems, and they're not actually expanding horizontally. So the question for us became, well, did it actually make sense to do that, particularly if users are paying for this? So tunnels are important. The other thing that we wanted to build into this is a regional hot network, high occupancy toll lanes. Those are actually high occupancy vehicle lanes where you allow single drivers to use those lanes if they pay a toll. And that would end up, and I'll show you in a minute what that network looks like, but essentially that's what gives you that guarantee of free flow travel throughout the entire region. Also, we looked at something that's been on the plans for a while, an outer beltway. And based on our end, which is the blue line here, this is new capacity. The idea is to actually recognize that with all the development outside Cook County, that north-south connections were actually were underrepresented in the transportation network, and we thought this kind of connectivity would be very important, as well as these tunnels are really to provide better north-south connectivity as well. And then we've got the Lake County Corridor, which has been on, Northbrook Palatine extension, the Elgin O'Hare extension, which has also been important, and of course the Ileana Corridor, which is down here as well. So these were the major projects, and in addition to that, this is essentially if we linked all of these segments here with the existing toll network. So this is all new capacity based on when we were looking at the plans and these things that would be built. Then if we linked those to existing toll roads and added price lanes to the existing road network, you would get this regional hot network, which is what this represents. We also looked, and this is another innovative part of what our study was doing, is we tried to figure out, are there ways that our arterial system could be improved? And part of that is using what's called using flyovers, or what we call queue jumpers, where at congested intersections, essentially you build new capacity so you can go over the congested intersection. Again, this would be priced. This is something new and innovative, particularly in the U.S., but the idea is that, and it's actually the concept is being implemented in Lee County, Florida, where you actually have this capacity where you've got that inside lane going over the intersection and you're charged electronically a quarter or maybe 50 cents, depending. So you have that option to do that. So we actually built that into the model as well. And we actually looked at the potential costs and effects on 54 locations. The other thing we added to this was bus rapid transit. The idea, again, we have a built environment, a very substantial metropolitan area. To what extent could we add a bus rapid transit component to this plan to actually to provide transit access to the region outside of the existing network and system? And these are the different networks and that we would have actually created and modeled. All right, so what happens when we sort of take all of these projects and sort of throw them into the model and ask ourselves and price it the way we want to, and what happens when we're in terms of traffic and the outcomes that we're looking at? One of the things that we thought was very interesting is we actually examined in 2040, this is our endpoint, what is the intensity of the traffic on each one of these components of the network that we're proposing. And what I think was very important for us was seeing how important the crosstown tunnel would actually be to the entire network. And you can see that in the intensity of the traffic. And again, these are average week. This is a VMT per lane mile on an average weekday. So the tunnels themselves get a fair amount of high volume, as well as the Midway extension, and the Elgin O'Hare gets a lot of traffic as well. But notice also that hot lanes are important as a component of this network as well. Now, pardon? These were estimated through the modeling, the regional transportation model of smart mobility. So in other words, they factor in income, population growth, and also keep in mind that's actually this includes the pricing component. In other words, even with the tolls on the roads, these are the traffic counts that are being estimated through the model. So in other words, this is not free. This is not people getting on and just being able to use the road without actually having to pay for it. So these are essentially represent paid customers, people that have decided the value of that road capacity is worth my time and money to be on that. So that's still what we're generating in terms of traffic intensity.
So off the top of your head, do you know the toll that would be charged from the Eisenhower to the Kennedy?
Our recommendation is yes. In other words, these tolls would all be advertised. Now, this is a modeling process, so yeah. It ranges because we've got the multiple periods. So we've got everything. It goes. I think one of the lowest we have is 17 cents a mile, and at the highest it's about $1 a mile or more. So it all depends on the level of traffic, because what we're doing is we're guaranteeing travel time. We're saying if you need to get from point A to point B, we're going to guarantee that you can do that. So that's what it is. So this is just illustrative. And in the report, in our appendices, we include all the tables that include all of the toll rates that were estimated and what they generated. When we look at the effects, when we look at the regional traffic, this is the actual vehicle hours traveled. And we've got a number of different metrics that we went through, and they're all in the study. I'm just pulling out a sampling of this. What we find is that at the baseline, this is our vehicle hours traveled currently. And if we don't build any of this capacity, this is where we end up at 8, actually I think up here. If we build all the projects, we're actually able to reduce the rate of growth, in this case, with just these 11 projects, by the way. This is not with, so there are lots of other capacity would be part of this. And when we factor in real income, as you would expect, it would go up. We also looked into different scenarios. The excluding component here is when we realized that the Eisenhower and Kennedy tunnels were very expensive. The question we asked is, what's the benefit of adding that compared to the cost? So we actually went through scenarios where we took out the Kennedy and Eisenhower tunnels to see what would happen to congestion and travel delay at that point. We also did that with the Q jumpers. And interestingly enough, it doesn't seem to, the Eisenhower and Kennedy on a regional level don't seem to have a huge impact on reducing the travel delay. What we thought was more interesting in our modeling were the clear benefits the city of Chicago received. So we actually looked at this in terms of the regional impact on congestion, Cook County, and then we actually modeled for the city of Chicago. And what was very interesting for us is that we're up here for the city of Chicago, we've got substantial increase in congestion, and we're able to reduce congestion or travel measured by vehicle hours traveled at this point significantly for the city of Chicago by providing better north-south connectivity on a regional level. So essentially what we're able to do is all of that traffic that gets caught coming into downtown that is actually trying to get from north to south ends up being routed under regional alternatives. And that our interpretation is that's what's improving the accessibility to the downtown and the reduction in travel delay as we see here. When we get to the revenues, this is something we found was very interesting. The hot network, even though it seemed to have, at least in empirical numbers, the lower level of intensity, actually generates the vast majority of the revenue that comes from this, because that, and we can see that here, that in these types of projects, the cross tunnel, and we actually go into the detail in the study itself where we look at individual facilities. But what this emphasized to us was the importance of looking at this infrastructure in terms of a network effect and the transportation effect. I think there's a tendency to look at each of these projects as if they are isolated projects, when in reality what we're looking at and what's generating these revenue numbers is the building out of all projects so you improve the regional network capability as part of this. And then the summary, and quick summary, and I'm running out of time, so I have to, I'll conclude here with maybe another minute or two, is if you take all the projected revenue and you look at our projected costs, we actually find that the user fees and the tolls that are actually being paid and are actually paying for these projects. So in other words, we're with the user fees in place and tolling, and I think it's important to understand that this is dynamic tolling because we're pricing at different levels of the day based on peak and off peak. That is really what's allowing us to capture a lot of revenue. That revenue allows us to pay for these projects. So this is not a net revenue loss for the region if they're built. And we think that's actually crucial to understanding not only the benefits to what these projects are, but also in terms of understanding how this could be structured. And we go in our study, we talk about the importance of public-private partnerships and how this actually provides a really important set of opportunities for financing and building these projects. So in conclusion, we believe that regional free-flow traffic speeds are achievable if you use existing technology and you build the transportation projects and price them the way we suggest. We believe the crosstown tunnel as well as the hot lane network, and again, it's a regional hot lane network, is really crucial to making the system work better, improve mobility, but also to fund it. And also, of course, as I already mentioned, the users are going to pay for these new facilities. We're pricing all new capacity is being priced. In our plan, we are not pricing existing capacity. So we are not actually taking existing roads and pricing it. This is all new capacity that's being priced in this case. And we also recommend a phased approach, mainly thinking given the potential benefits and costs, Eisenhower and Kennedy should probably be delayed. I haven't talked a lot about the BRT, but I'm happy to address that in Q&A as well. But we also believe, and this is an important part of our conclusion, that existing transit network needs to focus on its core not only core competencies, but also make sure that system is brought back into a state of good repair and is working efficiently, because that has to be the highest priority in terms of transit's effectiveness on a regional level. All right, I've already spent an extra minute. I'm sorry. Let me cede the podium over to Peter Scosi, with the Vice President for the Metropolitan Planning Council. And thank you.